Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, an introduction to India's snakes, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Conan Dumenil. Thank you so much for being here today, Conan. Over to you.
Thank you, Kendall. It's wonderful to be back again. And hello to everyone watching in and tuned in. Thank you very much. I think this Daily Dose of Nature format is just a wonderful opportunity to connect with each other and go on this journey a little bit virtual and take you to some interesting parts of the world and see some interesting species. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And really, when I talk about snakes, I've had a personal journey with them. And so I'd like to share with you some of my experiences and some of the really cool species I've had the opportunity to encounter. So, excuse me, when you talk about India, right, you often think about the truly iconic species such as the tiger or the bold elephant or the beautiful peacock. But really, with snakes, with close to 300 odd species of snakes, if India is the land of anything, it really should be the land of snakes. Sorry, folks, I'm just going to pause here for a second because just got a message pop up on my screen. And here we go. Okay. Kendall, could you confirm for me whether you can see my screen back again?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. These little error messages and then you lose control. Okay, so so India has close to 300 species of snakes, right? And it's really hard to miss them. And so anyone living in India, there's going to be some point in your life where you will see, if not encounter, a snake. And forgive the pun here, but there is snake and religion in India are intertwined. And India is a country that has a very, very strong religious following. In a predominant religion, that is Hinduism, there is a lot of iconography, there's a lot of depictions of snakes, and they're worshipped by some, they're revered and respected by a lot others, as you can see in some of the rituals here. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see there are some old stones, and these predate Hinduism. And these are fertility stones, or snake stones, supposed or believed to bring fertility to a family. And this picture is actually very similar. I have one very close to where I live, at the base of a tree near my house. So you'll find them all over the countryside. Now, my experience with snakes, my first vivid interaction I had was when I was 7. I was living in a community, and we had local volunteers come over to educate the people on living with snakes. And so the first snake I met, to actually encountered, was a green vine snake, a harmless little tree-dwelling snake, the one which is in the top right of your screen. And that's where it started. And little did I know that through the decades, I would go on to actually work with these snakes and work with some of, the leading herpetologists in the country on a global initiative to mitigate snakebite, and then actually have the opportunity to sit down with you good folks and talk about a subject that is close to heart and something that I really love. So what I want to do in this presentation is 4 things, 4 parts. Give you an overview of snakes in India. We'll look at a few key species and how to identify them. We'll also talk about when humans meet snakes, what happens, because we are in a country which has close to 1.3 billion people and a lot of snakes. And then also talk about a very pertinent issue that we face, which is snakebite, and talk a little bit about how to prevent them and how do we live with snakes. So snakes, there's about 4,000 odd species of them, close to 4,000 species, and they're found on all continents except Antarctica. Now, these snakes have a wide range, and they're found almost in all oceans except the Atlantic. And India, if you look at the map, sits right in the middle of the snake zone, right? We are a tropical country, and given our geographical variations and the number of ecotones and ecosystems we have, it makes perfect habitats for snakes, right? And like I said, so growing up, you or living in this country, there is some point in your life that you will see a snake. So let's have a look. Basically, what are snakes, right? They're limbless reptiles. They have a watertight, scaly skin with overlapping scales. They need outside conditions to regulate their body temperature. They cannot generate heat on their own. They can either lay eggs, or some snakes also hatch the eggs within their bodies and then lay live young. And this is true for a lot of sea snakes. All snakes are carnivorous. Some are known to scavenge, but mostly all are carnivorous, right? And they use their tongue more as a means to not so much for taste, but also as a sensory organ to smell. They don't have external ears, but what they do have is they have a ear structure, an internal ear structure, and they use their bodies and often their lower jaw to detect vibrations on the ground to know that they're coming. They even have a scale, and often you'll see this when you find molted snake skin. They have a scale over their eye, which is called brill, and it looks just like a contact lens if you have the chance of seeing some shed skin somewhere. Right. So let's look at snakes in India. Right. We have a large variety of them, close to 300 species. 285 species is what's currently being described. There are more being described every year, and this is because of new genetic work that's going in. So species getting split. What we thought was one species now turns out to be two or more. New areas being explored. So all of these turns out a very, very interesting area for biologists who are studying snakes. Now, the diversity of snakes we have in the country is immense, right? The colors and the patterns can rival, healthy coral reefs or butterflies. And let's just look at a few of these candidates that we have in this country. You cannot talk about India if you do not talk about the king cobra, right? A truly iconic species of snake. It is the longest venomous snake in the world. In India, they grow to about 10 feet, 10 plus feet, and the longest king cobras found in Thailand. So their range spreads across Southeast Asia. Their zoological name, interestingly, Ophiophagus hanna. And Ophiophagus means the one that eats snakes, and hanna is a forest-dwelling nymph. If you look at old records of king cobras, they also call them the harmless because they often found at the base of rotten trees or in tree stumps, and are very, very good climbers. They can climb up into the top of trees to hunt some arboreal snakes, and they eat only snakes. They are known to scavenge sometimes and pick up the odd monitor lizard or so, but their primary diet includes just snakes. Also, it's the only known species of snake that actually builds a nest, and the female will gather dry leaves and twigs and forest litter together into a big pile, and that's where she'll sit and guard her eggs once she's laid them up to the time they hatch. Moving on, we have the Burmese python. Doesn't win any prizes for the best looking snake, but at 19 feet long, it's one of the largest we have in the country and also one of the heaviest snakes in the world. Now, interestingly, Burmese python were common in the pet trade, and Florida has a lot of Burmese pythons because people have let them loose from the pet trade. So if there's an interesting documentary, if you get the chance to watch it, I think it's called Pythons in Florida, where they a show where two traditional snake hunter-gatherer tribesmen from India were taken to Florida. I think this was about 4 years ago, to hunt and get rid of the menace that the Burmese pythons cause there. Now, it's not a native species, so you can imagine the ecological repercussions of an introduced predator in a system that's not meant for it. It can have a lot of repercussions. So look at this, look up this documentary when you have the chance. We also have some of the tiniest snakes. Now, at the right is the Brahmini worm snake. A couple of them. The bluish one you see is a snake that's just getting ready to molt or shed its skin. Now, these are just a couple of inches long, absolutely harmless. In fact, the mouth is designed to eat ant larvae. So they're often found in flower pots, and it's because of this and the flower trade, they've actually now the Brahmini worm snake is now found in a lot of gardens across the world because they made it in flower pots. We also have the gorgeous shield tails, the one on the left, and tiny little keelbacks, which are found in forest streams and under leaf litter. Most of these small snakes are burrowing snakes, and if you look closely at the Brahmini worm snake on the right, you'll notice that it has a hooked tail. It looks just like an earthworm. It behaves just like an earthworm, but when you look closer, you'll actually see the scale patterns. And the tiny snakes are always found under leaf litter or burrowed underground. We have the absolutely gorgeous ornate flying snake. Can snakes fly? Well, they're not capable of true flight, but these can actually glide. So the ornate snake has grooved scales on its belly, which enables it to climb really, really well. And what the snake does, it lives mostly up in the treetops. It's very hard to find them, though they have a good range in the southwestern part and the northeastern part of India. I've only seen one once in my life, and that it was when we got a rescue call and the snake was found in a train. So we don't know where it came from. But I've never seen one fly in the wild, and to see that is truly a spectacular experience. So what they do is they climb up to the top of trees and they flatten out their bellies and expand the ribs, and they thrash about midair like a swimming motion, and can actually change direction on where and decide where they want to land. Now, these snakes are mildly venomous in the sense that they don't inject venom, but they have really long rear fangs, and they have a toxic saliva which helps them catch really fast-moving prey like geckos and small birds. We have snakes that can fly. We also have snakes that can swim. Now, it is true that almost all snakes can swim. Some of them swim very well on the surface of the water, and then some, like the sea snakes, can actually swim underwater and hold their breath for several minutes on end. This sea snake, the yellow-lipped sea crate, is actually one of the widely distributed snakes across the world. They're found as far as New Zealand and even up to Mexico. They live on coral reefs. They give birth to live young in the ocean, and they only come to land sometimes during high tide. They wait for the tide, especially during night. They come up to land to rest and then go back and to hunt and live in the sea. We have snakes that live, well, practically in the snow line. This picture here is the Himalayan pit viper, and they're normally found in coniferous forests amongst fallen timber, pine needles, boulders, and sometimes even they're known to even wander up to hikers' tents. So if you're camping out in the mountains in the Himalayas, this is one species of snake to look out for. They don't have particularly toxic venom, but their bites can be well, disastrous. They can cause a few reactions. Now, this snake was recorded at a glacier, near a glacier in one of India's northwestern states at 16,000 feet, which makes it the highest ever recorded snake anywhere in the world. We have snakes with some interesting features, like the pupils here. Now, the picture on the top is a vine snake, and if you look at it, it's got horizontal pupils, and it's got this really deep groove extending from the eye to its nose, which gives it binocular vision. Now, a vine snake, I want you to imagine, is a snake that lives amongst the thickets of branches amongst leaves, and they hunt really fast prey like birds and flying and toads and insects sometimes. And having binocular vision really helps them judge their prey. We have snakes like the one below, a pit viper, which has vertical pupils. Now, vertical pupils help dilate and help them see during day and night. So when they need to have nocturnal vision, those pupils dilate really wide, perfect rounds, and letting more light in, and they can hunt for their prey at night. Also, we have snakes that have pits, and you see the pit viper down gets its name from those pits, which are heat-sensing pits. And if you're after small mammals that live in the shrub, they use the heat-sensing pits to track down these mammals like mice and rats and feed on them. The other interesting behavior, we have snakes that wrestle. Now, male combat is what it's called in the snake world, is when two snakes, and a lot of species are known to do this, rat snakes, cobras, and here we have pictures of king cobras engaged in male combat. Now, what this event is, it's really a wrestling match between two males. Now, the males wrestle each other for territory, and therefore, or rather by that extension, the rights to mate with the female, right? And, you know, to describe this event, it'll be like wrestling meets ballet. It's aggressive in a way that there's a lot of power involved, but it's so graceful in the sense that it actually looks like these two snakes are dancing. Now you can see them intertwined with each other, their bodies writhing, and often people who look at and see this think they're mating, but it's not, right? And you can understand why the confusion. But the snakes don't bite each other. There's a lot of hissing, but what it really does is one snake tries to subdue the other one by sheer force. The mouths are closed the entire time, and it's just the power of that muscular body and one snake trying to push the other down. And this can go on for hours and extended periods of time. And by the end of it, the loser slithers away and the victor stays and claims his territory. We also have snakes that are recorded to have a virgin birth, or parthenogenesis, as we have now. Back to our friends the worm snakes. Now, all worm snakes are female. There's no male in the species, and they are known to have lay fertilized eggs and produce viable young without having the need to mate or find a male, right? So that just gives you some perspective, right? We don't men are not needed in that genus at all. We also have, and a lot of reptiles and birds have been known to do this in captivity. Crocodiles have been known to lay viable eggs or fertile eggs without a male, and species such as the reticulated python, which is found on one island group in India, have been known in captivity to produce fertile and viable eggs. We have species that are variable in color. Looking here at these three photographs, these are all pictures of the Himalayan pit viper. Now, biologically, these are all the same. They're not different races, they're the same species, but due to the environment that they're in, they can have different color. Now, they're not able to change their color after birth, but there are groups of these species, and we see them across a lot of pit vipers as well. The coloration is specific to certain geographical regions. So when I say that, I mean that in this valley, you could have a grayish-looking snake, and then 2 valleys away, or in a different state or in a different range, the same species of snake can be found in a completely different pattern. And this talks about the evolutionary aspect of how colors and patterns determine their viability in that ecosystem. We also have few species of snake that can resemble each other. Now, all of these are pictures of green pit vipers that exist in the northeastern part of India. Now, they all look the same. So obviously, this is a formula that's worked evolutionary for them. It's something that they're able to function in and work with the ecosystem that they live in. but with minute differences. So, and a lot of these species are now very, very interesting to science, because as you study genetics now, on the outside, morphologically, they all look the same. But as you start looking at the genes, you find very, very minute differences between all of them. We have snakes that also resemble each other between species. Now, here are two pictures of snakes. The one on the top left is a coral snake, a venomous one. And then the one on the bottom right is the Dumenil's black-headed snake, a non-venomous snake. So here obviously is one non-venomous snake mimicking itself to look like a venomous one, and obviously with the protection that comes with it, or so no one wants to. So no species would probably, birds or something like that, would poke around and mess around with this snake. So it's again an adaptation that works in self-defense. So looking at all this diversity, right, all the colors and the patterns, your question you might ask is, so how do we actually identify a snake, right? So how do you tell, or more importantly, how do you tell a venomous one from a non-venomous one when they all look so different? Is there an actual formula to tell between species? Now, in some places, there is information available which says some snakes look for triangular head. A triangular head snake is venomous. Look for the shape of pupil. If it has this kind of pupil, then it's venomous. If it has that kind of pupil, it's not. But that doesn't really work in a country, or by extension in Southeast Asia, really, because of the diversity of snakes. Now, if you would look at take North America, for example, if you say a triangular headed snake is venomous. Now, this may be true to a certain extent, because all rattlesnakes have a triangular head pattern, or head shape rather, and some of the others like Yagata snakes or milk snakes do not. But in India, we have a lot of snakes that resemble. So that formula doesn't work. Now, looking at the pictures here, now to the right of your screen, on the top, there is a harmless rat snake, a baby rat snake, and at the bottom, you have a baby cobra that's just hatching from a shell. Now, looking at both of them, they practically look like twins, and this is one of the biggest confusions we have in India: is how do you tell a venomous snake from a non-venomous snake when they all look alike? Now, the long answer would be you look for particular patterns, particular colorations, and particular features that will distinguish one from the other. Now, take here, for example, we have the common krait. Now, the common krait is a highly venomous snake, probably the most toxic venom we have amongst the Indian snakes. And what you really need to look for if you were out here is the thin white stripe, the little bands that run across the body, and also a very, very distinct vertebral scale pattern that it has. Now, the krait is often confused with wolf snakes, though much smaller, but they can have very, very similar markings. And wolf snakes are completely harmless, non-venomous snakes. Here we have the common wolf snake, which is also similar in pattern. Now, another confusion that often happens with our snakes is here we have the very dangerous Russell's viper, very closely related to North American rattlesnakes in the sense that they're true vipers. And the Russell's viper is public enemy #1 in India when it comes to the number of people that die from snake bites. Now, Russell's viper here, a distinct marking is the chain-like pattern which you can see on the back. It does have a triangular shaped head. It has very large nostrils, which you can't really make out from this picture, but those are some of the distinct features. Now, very often, Russell's viper can be confused with the harmless sand boa we see here. Again, a big-bodied snake with similar patterns, but again, these patterns can vary. But what you need to look out here for is the short tail. It has a very, very short tail as compared to the Russell's vipers. Also, when you look at the scales on the body, the sand boa has very, very tiny, almost granular-like scales. And this is actually an adaptation for this snake because it lives just under the surface of sand, where it's an ambush predator, and those granular patterns help it blend in, camouflage with the sand. Brussels vipers are often confused with pythons, baby pythons, and I'm going to digress here a little bit and tell you a story from about maybe 10 years ago, when I was working with an organization, and we would do some snake rescues in the sense that rescue people from snakes. We got a call from this lady who was outside a shopping mall in a sort of newly developed part of town, which was on the outskirts of town in Bangalore, South India. And she called us, the phone call saying, "Hey, I found a baby python, and I've caught him and put him in my shopping bag, and he's here, this poor snake, someone better come and help him and release him in a place that he needs to be." Now, the first thing that ran through our minds was that there's no baby pythons here. You don't find them here. It's not their distribution. And the first thought was like, it has to be a Russell's viper. So without letting the lady freak out or cause her any more distress, we said, okay, hold on to it, leave the bag in a corner somewhere, keep an eye on it, and we'll come and get it. And then lo and behold, when we went there, it was a Russell's viper. Now, it was a good opportunity to also tell them not to pick up snakes, and really you ought to be staying away from them. But that's the reality we have here in India. We have a lot of snakes that come into contact with humans, and we will talk about this a little bit more in detail as we progress into the webinar. One other commonly found species of snake, again, which are commonly confused with each other, are the saw-scale viper and the cat snake. They live in very, very similar habitats, and they have very, very similar markings. But again, what we're looking for here is just the pattern and shape of the scales. They're tiny snakes, and you have to get close to them. But the point here being that if you really need to get close to a snake, well, there's no need to get that close to a snake to identify them. Pit vipers, here the bamboo pit viper, again, triangular shaped head. We look for the pits on the nose, often confused with a harmless green keelback, which is a common snake found across aquatic regions in the country. So how do we tell, really? We've seen there's so much similarity in colors between species. We've seen that there's so much variation between the colors of species. So how can you accurately tell? Now, for the purpose of science, if you want to tell a species or diversify species in a genus, what you really need to look at is scales. Now, when you study snakes closely, we look at patterns and scales. Now, these patterns vary across species. You count the number of scales, and this is arduous work. If you have live specimens, then there is care that has to be taken to do it. But often what's easy enough is we count them from shed skin or molted skin, which is easy enough to do, and with no duress for both the human and the snake. But to truly tell the identity of a snake, this is where we get down. Now, sometimes scale patterns can be similar between species, like the green pit vipers, as we saw a few slides previous. The scale patterns can be the same. And then you actually get down into more detail by counting the number of teeth, the dentation, because this is all adapted towards specific locations that they live in. And you also look at the reproductive organs. Male snakes have what are called hemipenes, which is a pair of reproductive organs. We actually count the number of spurs on those hemipenes to see whether it's an actual species or a different species. So that's when scientists get their hands into it. Again, excuse the metaphor, to tell one species from the other. So what happens when humans meet snakes? Now, unfortunately, in this country, and I suppose pretty much across the world, that is the first reaction. And like I said, in a country such as India, where we have a high density of humans and a high density of snakes living with each other, these reactions are expected. And they're expected for several reasons. Number one, even though we are a country that lives with a lot of snakes, and snakes are part of our mythology, it's part of our religion, but that's where it ends. There is often a lack of understanding of the species that live around us, and also no formal awareness of what snakes are, how they move, what do they do, and how we need to interact with them. And a lot of these fears are stemmed by folklore, by stories, by television. We have now, there's no dearth of television programming that talks about the most dangerous snake in the world, or the deadly snakes, and things like that. Just hyperbole rhetoric. But what it doesn't really talk about is how do we live with snakes. And I think also at a point, there is human, at least if I were to draw the context in India, a land which has always been tolerant with living with other living creatures. You look at the tenets of Buddhism, which has its origins in India. It talks about ahimsa, or living in harmony with your beings. At some point, humanity or cultures, we have lost that connect. Right? We're not willing to share our resources with snakes, with animals, or with humans, for that matter. Now, there are daily encounters when we talk about with snakes. Now, a majority of the population, or there is a rather large chunk of the population, would not even see a snake on a day-to-day basis, but there are significant portions of the population, of the Indian population, that come into contact with snakes. Number one being farmers and agriculturalists. A lot of the country, if I think I wouldn't be wrong in saying 60% of India is still, or more than 60% is still under agriculture. So there's a lot of farming space, and that's where we find a lot of snakes. And as a result of which, a large chunk of our population comes into contact with snakes on a daily basis. We also have people who make a living from snakes. So rescuers, snake charmers, people who just showboat, who come into contact or physical contact with these snakes. Now, when you talk about India, or if you have visited India, I'm sure some of these images are very familiar to you if you've seen India on TV. It is a land of snake charmers, as some would call it. A lot of people, there are specific communities, and a lot of people in these communities that make a living of showboating snakes to the public. It is the sense of livelihood for a lot of people, but there's also the ugly truth. Now, for many of these snakes that you see in the previous pictures, it does not end well for them. Snake charmers resort to often inhumane activities such as ripping the fangs out of venomous snakes, because you don't want a cobra. If you're showboating a cobra, you don't want a cobra that will potentially come back and bite you. So they sew the mouth shut. Often they're cauterized with really crude iron implements, and at the end of it all, it doesn't end well for the snake, right? They lose the snake, and after a few weeks, you have to go and get a new snake. So it causes a lot of damage to one particular species, which is why the government of India now has banned or is restricting the use of snakes, or snake charmers catching snakes in the wild and displaying them out in public. But this is an important question to ask people who handle snakes. For your information, snakes come under a schedule of protected species in the country. So it is illegal to handle them without proper permissions. So even if you're treating snakes, you have to get the right permissions and check with the right authorities. The other people, and here's one of the most important questions we get asked, or one of the most pertinent scenarios, is when snakes and farmers meet, right? Like I said, India is a lot of agricultural landscape, and we have a lot of species of snakes that live in this landscape. Now, just to throw things in perspective, now about 30% of all agriculture produce, it's estimated, is lost due to rodents, right? This could be just due to improper storage and also during harvesting and during the crop growing season. Now, snakes are not just found here in the wild and in rural spaces as we see here, but they're also found in urban spaces and in developing spaces, which is now becoming an area where we see more and more conflict happening. It's hard to wrap your head around this figure, but 40 to 60,000 people die every year in India from snake bites. And about 3 times that amount of people actually suffer effects such as disability, a loss of livelihood, and also the fact that getting treated for a snake bite in a hospital is a very, very expensive affair. And most of these people, as you see here, are farmers, people in the lower to mid-income group, and one visit to the hospital for a snake bite can set them back a few years, if not a lifetime. Now, it is estimated that close to 2 million people a year die from snake bite. About 50% of that number is accounted from India, and this has been a study undertaken by the WHO, where they've compiled 10 years of data and estimate that close to 1 million people from 2009 to 2019 have died from snake bite in India. Now, a lot of snake bites in India are attributed to what we call the big four. Now, the big four are these 4 species of snakes we see here: the spectacled cobra, the common krait, the Russell's viper, and the saw-scaled viper. Now, these are very commonly found snakes. They're found in rural areas. They can be found in cities such as where I live, if you go on the outskirts, or in areas which are developing or farmlands. Now, the reason why most of these snakes are found here is that, you know, as the country grows, or as more areas come under farmland, or as a lot of areas are being cultivated, this gives an invitation, or this is an open invitation for animals such as rats and mice to come in. Now, if you look at the snake problem in India, or the snake bite problem, it is interwoven, it is interlinked so much with human lifestyle, right? And then when we talk about mitigating this conflict, it's often a very simple solution about changing your lifestyle, which will then help you reduce the areas of conflict you have with the snake, right? So just talking about lifestyle, right? People live in rural areas, we farm, we grow crops. And it is because of that we have species such as rats and mice come in. Now, in paddy fields, for instance, we have a huge rodent problem because the fields are submerged under water for most parts of the year. There are embankments along the side. Rats and mice come in. They take their homes up in embankments. They build their burrows, and that's where the snakes follow them too. And the study about snake bite, again, drawing your attention to a couple of studies. One was undertaken by the WHO, and the other was also a million death study we talk about, which was by the University of Toronto. A lot of these studies were grassroots level studies where they went to villages and interviewed people. And what studies have shown us this, and a host of other studies that are still, and some of them still undertaken in the country, what this has shown us is that a large chunk of people in India are between the age group of 15 to 60. So we're looking at a young or a working population of people that are getting bit. And most of the bites are on hands, some on the arms, and most of the bites are below the ankles on the feet. Now, when you sort of extrapolate this with the lifestyle in India, you know that this is where a lot of farmers are coming into contact during harvesting, during gathering of firewood, during collection of crops, and this is where they come into contact with snakes. Now, snakes such as Russell's viper and the saw-scaled viper, as you see below, now these are snakes that are very active at night, and most of the bites you see from these are on feet. And that's because a lot of people in the country walk about with no shoes, and they walk about after dark. Many places in the country, and this is a trend that is slowly changing, but many places especially in rural India, do not have indoor sanitation. They do not have indoor bathrooms, so they have to go out into the bush to relieve themselves at night. And this is when they come into contact with some of these species. The venom from these species are what we call medically significant, because they are very potent venom. The cobras and kraits have a very strong neurotoxic venom that affects the nervous system, causes paralysis, and vipers have a very strong hemotoxic venom, which disrupts the blood cells or breaks down the blood cells and cause excessive bleeding. Sea snakes, though some very potent venom, hardly ever come into contact with people, and there are very few recorded bites from sea snakes, which is why even though the venoms are the most toxic in the world, do not figure on this list. Now, before I move to the next slide, I'd just like to give our audience a chance. We are talking about snake bites, so there could be there are a few images that some of you might find distressing. So if you want to turn away and just listen for a couple of minutes while I introduce the problem of snake bite in India. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this here is even though you're an audience that does not live here, but this is a very pertinent problem that affects the country. Now, if you think back to the numbers that was estimated, 40 to 50,000 people lose their lives every year to snake bite. So it's very hard for someone to talk about snakes and their ecological importance and how cool they are without also addressing the flip side of this and what we can do about this. Right? It is a huge number. In fact, if I remember rightly, I think it is ranked number 6 on the list of problems that, or rather events that affect deaths in India, right behind cancer, HIV, malaria, and road accidents. So snakebite is a big problem. It is a problem not just in India, but also in Southeast Asia. And for this reason that the WHO has actually listed it as a neglected tropical disease. What we know, the reason why we have such a high incidence of snakebite in India and not probably Latin America or Africa, where we have equally same amount of snakes, is because there's a lot of things that we don't know. And again, we'll get into this shortly. Now, what we knew so far, or rather what we thought, it was just the 4 species of snakes that were medically important. But studies have now shown, and what we know now, there's at least 15 species of snakes that potentially can or have recorded to cause human fatalities or loss of livelihood. Now, when you have that many species of snakes with a density of population, these are the questions that you will ask. So these are the situations that we will encounter. Now, added to that diversity, we also have, or we've seen that there is significant geographical variation in venom. Now, for instance, the Russell's viper is a snake that's found across most part of the countries. We know that there is possibly 1 species of snake that's across the country, but what we've seen is that the venom, the molecular structure of the venom is different from a snake, say in South India, to one found in the northern part of India. Now, venom is a protein that is evolved in a snake to digest its food. So you can imagine, because of the different environments they live in and because of the different food or different species they prey on, the venom has evolved naturally. So what does that mean for treatment, right? Which means that if you have a variation in venom, the anti-venom which you're using won't be as effective as it is in some cases as versus some others. Speaking of which, the anti-venom which we have in the country is what's called a polyvalent anti-venom, and it is made from the venom of these 4 or the big four species. So what happens if you get bitten by something that's not in the big four? Does it work? Well, we're studying that to find out. Another problem that compounds this whole thing is that there is a weak healthcare structure in India. Whereas anti-venom is now stopped in even from the village level, which is the grassroots level of healthcare infrastructure. We have what's called the primary healthcare centers, all the way up to your major specialty hospitals in India. Access to this healthcare often is the problem. We have people living in remote areas that cannot access this, either for want of being geographically separate, or also for just the fear of what that treatment is going to cost you. Now, as a result of which, a lot of people, especially in rural areas, and because going back to our first slide where we spoke about snakes and religion being so intertwined, there is a belief on traditional practices and sometimes just plain out quack remedies which people would do. I don't know if you've seen some Indian movies, but I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s, a lot of movies depicted people, or when snakes bite, you suck out the remedies, or you get a leaf, you chew it up and put it on. Now, none of these work. None of it work, even though there are some traditional hunter-gatherer tribes that work with a lot of medically important plants or medically significant plants. None of the science is robust enough to know that there are traditional remedies. So right now, the only sure shot remedy is the anti-venom. But then there also, in our country, in India, there is a severe shortage between the production of anti-venom and what actually is the demand. So often we have cases of people going from hospital to hospital, or ambulances, at least in a city, shuttling anti-venom from one place to the other because not all places can stock anti-venom. And finally, due to all, there is an extreme dearth of knowledge and protocol of what to do when you're bitten. Often people waste time. They try all sorts of remedies before actually going to a hospital. You don't know whether you're bitten by a venomous snake or not venomous snake. What are the signs you're supposed to look for? And because of all this, a lot of time is lost in the process, which results in those large, tragically staggering numbers that we see. So if snakes are such a problem, why do we need them? So snakes can actually be quite useful. We've seen or we've heard that they keep the rodent population in check, and in most cases they are there because of the rodents. Now, snake venom is used in the field of pharmacology and medicine, amongst other things, to make anti-venom, but also the venom is at the cutting edge of science to work on other diseases as well. Venom is now being studied to see if it can work on ailments such as Parkinson's, for cancer, etc., etc. So understanding the molecular structure of venom, how it works on animals and what it does, whether it can short out synapses or whether it can block out synapses in your nervous system, whether it can cause a clotting factor, which some venoms do. All these are very important fields or important areas which are being studied. And end of the day, snakes play a very, very critical role in balancing the ecosystem. And we all know that once you remove one figure, like if you look here, imagine an ecosystem which has a bunch of snakes, right? Now, these snakes take care of a bunch of rats, which inhabit that ecosystem. So going back, so let's say we remove the snakes from this. Either it could be, say, a snake has come into your garden, you call a snake rescue, like, hey, I've got a dangerous snake, get it out of here. We take it out, it goes and they drop it in an area somewhere else, right? So that snake is removed from the system. What happens? There is a void that is created, and that void can be filled either by more rats, or then more snakes would then come in to occupy that niche. So whereas, say you had, for example, say you had one snake living in your backyard, you now remove that, then you've now created a void in that niche for more snakes to come in. And maybe you just had a harmless a rat snake, but then that space could be occupied by a cobra or a Russell's viper. So we see that the role they play in the ecosystem, as with so many other organisms, is a very, very important one. So what do we do, right? So we have to live with them. What do we do, right? There are, like I said, it is so interrelated to lifestyle that a few lifestyle changes can actually affect whether you're coming into conflict with snakes or not. Now, a lot of this information here, again, we're talking about India, but you can take this information here and put it into the country you live in, into that context. So several things will help you. Maybe you do not have a big problem with snakes as you would in India, but it can help you. There are dangerous snakes around, and this could also help you with that. So one of the major things here we see in work is when you have clear paths in your gardens or your yard. Now, if you have a specific leaf shedding season, such as autumn, or in our country, it works a little different. Just before summer, a lot of trees will shed their leaves. Having a clear path amongst the leaf litter is certainly helpful. It will help you see the snake, and will also, most importantly, help the snake see you and give you enough warning that they are there, right? And as we've seen with a lot of cases in India, many of the accidents happen when people step on snakes because they don't know they're there. So having a clear pathway will certainly help. Managing thickets around your house, wood piles, and heavy bushed areas, keeping an eye on that from time to time will just make sure that you're not creating a safe habitat or a very welcome habitat for snakes. Now, what works a lot in India is a lot of village houses generally have wood piles outside, which they collect during the summer season and keep them ready for the monsoons. Now, wood piles are a super space to find snakes. They're like the ideal habitat to find them. We've also found that a lot of houses don't really take care of the food waste they generate. And so once you notice that once people start cleaning or keeping the areas around their habitation safe and sanitized, it cuts down the amount of rodents, it cuts down the amount of frogs and things that would come in, and by extension, cut down the number of predators, aka snakes, which then follow these animals to your house, right? So these simple methods, I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's something really simple that you could do to avoid snakes. Checking shoes, and I'm sure all of you, any one of you who have been out camping and taking your shoes out of your tent have this, but checking your shoes before you wear them on, it's something. And for us, well, personally, if I were to speak, is something that becomes second nature. One other thing that we've seen make a marked difference in rural areas and some of the areas where some of my colleagues study snake and human interactions is torchlights or flashlights. Most rural areas in India are not well lit. There are a few street lights, but a lot of parts are dark. And so you've seen people who carry lanterns, and now thanks to a lot of cell phones having flashlights and simple and just availability of solar lanterns and just wind up torchlights, we've seen that make a marked difference in people's coming into contact with snakes. At least we hear from the population saying, oh, I actually saw a snake and I knew it was there and I had to avoid the path. So just simple things like that we've seen make a difference. Now, I'm not I know we're at the top of the hour. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on first aid because again, this is very country specific. But again, very simple processes. To put it all in a nutshell, do not complicate things. Keep it simple in case you encounter a snake or someone who needs first aid. The first thing you do is call an evac, get to a hospital, take note of the signs. You don't have to worry about what snake bit because medical professionals are trained to know by looking at symptoms. There are a few things that you should avoid. Avoid that, but just keep it simple and get to the hospital as soon as possible. A lot of this information I've got from these institutes down here. We know a lot more about snakes today thanks to cutting edge research, thanks to in-depth ecological surveys and funding from these organizations that have been working with snakes. We know a lot more today than we knew 10 years ago, and it's because of the initiative shown by some of these organizations and people who have mentioned working with snakes in the country. So, Kendall, I'd like to close my presentation here and hand it over to you to hear from our audience if we have any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Conan. I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question today, you can submit that in your control panel under the questions field. And of course, really quickly, in case anyone needs to leave, if you're interested in learning anything about any of our India trips, you can go to our website or give us a call or send us an email. The contact information is on the screen. Okay, first question. What's the best way to tell the difference between a venomous and a non-venomous snake? Do venomous snakes typically show a warning sign like rattlesnakes do?
Yes. Now, thankfully, a lot of snakes actually show warning signs. And typically, if you were to look at it, the most dangerous ones will give you a sign. Rattlesnakes, for instance, cobras will rear up and show their hood. Snakes in India, such as the Russell's vipers, have a huge, a very loud, they have huge nostrils and a very loud hissing sound. And small snakes, even like the saw-scale viper, will rub its scales together and make this sawing sound. So yes, a lot of snakes will give you fair warning. The thing is to be in tune, especially if you're in the outdoors or in areas where you think are inhabited by snakes, to be in tune for these signs. I would say it's as simple as crossing the street. Like you would look for traffic, look for the red, green light, and then cross. It's the same thing with snakes. When you're in an area that has snakes, look out for signs or look out for the actual snakes on paths and use things like torchlights, flashlights to help you avoid these things. But there is really no marked difference to say this is a venomous snake or this is a non-venomous snake. The advice would be get to know the snakes in your area, get to know which ones are okay to approach and which ones are the best left alone.
Good advice. So you mentioned a low production of anti-venom, and so there were some people who were really curious about this, and one person's wondering how widely the supply is distributed, and is it just found in larger cities, and how much does it cost to treat someone with anti-venom, and if it's available, are there government efforts to make it more affordable?
Yeah, so the situation with anti-venom today is better than what it was a few years ago. Till a few years ago, we had just one institute that produced. Today, if my memory serves me right, we have at least 5. Now, that's with the production of anti-venom. Now, the problems with this, or the flip side to this, is that the distribution network. Now, anti-venom used to be available only in a form of a liquid, a serum, that had to be refrigerated. So even when we were to go out on field studies, or a lot of scientists out in the field couldn't carry antivenom with them. So it's not part of your first aid kit because it had to be kept under -2 degrees Celsius. Thankfully, a couple of years ago, we have now lyophilized antivenom, which is in a powder form, so it just needs to be mixed in distilled water, in sterile water, and then injected into your IV. So that now makes the portability of antivenom better. Now, the bigger problem is that people reaching the hospitals, more than hospitals actually stocking this. Yes, in cities, there are hospitals that stock them. In rural areas, there are healthcare centers that technically are supposed to stock them. But again, there are variations, there are aberrations to this. The government policy is that all primary healthcare centers, that is the lowest, the grassroots level of healthcare service in India, should be stocked with antivenom. But having said that, the problem is that when you give antivenom, you also need certain life support or certain infrastructure in place to watch how that venom reacts. So we've got that issue. The cost right now of antivenom is about 370 odd rupees per vial of antivenom. So that's $50 if I'm doing the math right, per vial. But you could use several vials. You could use up to 20, 30 vials sometimes for a treatment, depending on how severe the bite was. But also there's the additional cost of the health support system, ventilators, doctors' fees, hospital fees, and all of that, which compounds the treatment. So it is a dire situation. It's a situation, I mean, we'll accept that, but it's a situation that hopefully is improving. We've seen improvements in the past few years. We only hope that the system will get better.
Mm-hmm. Someone's wondering if there are any educational programs about snakes for farmers or others in rural areas.
Yes, and I say that with excitement because this is something I was involved with myself. I worked a lot with school children and college-going students in spreading awareness about snakes, why we need them, what roles they function, and how to stay away from them, and what to do in case you're in a bad spot. Thankfully, there is a lot of government and non-government, more non-government participation in this. And thanks to all the studies and science that we now have informed decisions or informed or robust information that we can then take to rural areas and take the information to them and hopefully effect change. So there is a growing movement. I've seen it grow in the past few years, and it is very, very satisfying.
That's great. Okay, we're gonna move on to just a few more questions, and it's about snakes in general. First, though, I'd like you to repeat the name of the documentary that you mentioned.
Okay, sorry, I don't know the exact name, but I think it was called Snakes in Florida, or Hunting Snakes in Florida. But if you were to go to Google and put keywords in, put Florida, put Burmese pythons, and put Indian snake hunters, and that should get you on the right path. It's about the tribe called the Irula, I-R-U-L-A. They were an erstwhile hunter-gatherer tribe that lived in South India, and this documentary follows their journey. They've never sat on a plane before, and this is the first time they're out of the country. They're in a new country, and they found an immense amount of snakes. So yeah, check it out. It was, I want to say that it was a BBC, it was an Animal Planet and Discovery Channel production.
All right, that sounds great. Okay, someone's wondering if the Burmese python has a natural predator.
King cobras in India. Small Burmese pythons can be eaten by king cobras. I can tell you a quick story. This is a webinar in itself, but I'll condense it really short. In my early years as a naturalist, I was out on safari hunting, sorry, not hunting, but hunting with binoculars, tigers, right? And we were looking out for tigers, and then we came across on the sort of bend in the road. I saw this tiger at eating something on the ground, and as our jeep started approaching, the tiger went away. It fled. It just slinked away into the bush. And as we got closer, I saw this huge carcass, and what it turned out to be was this spotted deer that had been swallowed by a Burmese python. And the Burmese python was so full, it couldn't move. It was coiled up in this thicket, and this tiger had come and ripped the python open and started eating, well, I would assume both the python and the deer. I don't have any photographic evidence, but this is an image that stayed with me. And yeah, so they do have predators.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Thank you. Someone here is wondering where the snake's internal organs, like the heart and the lungs, are actually located within the body.
Oh, it's really cool. They're all arranged in a line. It's like, just imagine a train. You got the engine, which is the brain, and then you've got all the organs lined up as carriages, and then you have well, the cloaca, which is with the caboose. And so their lungs are not side by side. They're in line with each other. Sometimes one lung can be much larger than the other. The stomach cavity and intestines occupy a large part, and you can feel the heartbeat if you hold. Well, I say if you hold, but I've had the privilege of holding non-venomous snakes in my hand, and if you hold them really gently and in the right place, you can actually feel the heartbeat. But it's a weird feeling, because you looking at them, I give it. They are weird. They're just one long thing, and all the organs are just lined up in the body.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
A couple more questions here, and then we'll call it. A few people were wondering how kraits and other water-dwelling snakes, how often they have to come to the water surface to breathe.
It depends from species to species. Some of them can hold their breath between 5 to 15 minutes underwater, so they do come up to surfaces. A lot of sea kraits will come up to land with the tide. They also can be found on shallow coral reefs, basking sometimes in the shallows. But there are also some snakes which are truly pelagic, like the black and yellow sea snake, for example, which is found in the open sea, and they're so hard to see because they don't even hang around near the coastline. They're just completely out in the open sea. So yeah, nothing is known how long they can hold their breath underwater. Do they need to come on land at all? Yeah, it's such an interesting area to study.
And final question today, how long does it take for a large snake like a boa, for example, to get to full size?
Oh, snakes continue growing throughout their life. Of course, the rate of growth will reduce as they get older. But if you've encountered or seen snake skin anywhere, you'll know that they shed their skin because they grow, and this is a process that they do through their life. Now, often to reach full size or adulthood, again, depending on the species, can be a couple of years, 4 to 5 years, or more than that. And again, once they hit the peak, then the rate slows down. But large snakes grow. They grow well into their 30s or 40s, like some of the captive snakes do.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Conan, thank you so much. This was really fascinating. I know we've all learned so much about the snakes of India. Thank you so much for staying up really late and presenting for us today. I'm going to hand it back over to you for our closing comments.
Sure. Thank you. It was my absolute pleasure, and thank you all for signing in and for those questions. If you want to look up snakes or have a good entryway into it, another documentary which I thought of when we were talking about this is a documentary called 1 Million Snakebites. This is something that was produced a few years ago, but a lot of that information stays true. Check it out. It's a good leeway into snakes in India. I just want to close with this picture. Often we look at snakes with disdain, with contempt, sometimes fascination, but also this shot, this photograph of the world through a snake's eyes. Yes, it is blue skies and palm trees. They look at the same things, but they also look at humans as these huge towering giants, which they are scared of most of the time. So there is a healthy respect that we need to cultivate with these creatures. Um, we have a lot more to gain from them than they from us. And I think with the right information and with the right attitude, we can coexist and if not learn more about these fascinating creatures. So thank you again, everyone.
Thanks again, Conan. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.